then welcome. We have been out and about for the last 2 weeks. So as you join, if we weren't here last week, it's because we weren't here last week. But we're back this week. And so as folks join us in the next few minutes or so, we're happy to be back with you. So thanks for joining us. And if you're watching it from the beginning, we're just getting kicked off. And today we are going to talk. This is by request. The last time, 2 weeks ago, we're going to talk about war and, good gosh, y'all, what is it good for? So we're going to talk about war and maybe provide some insight on how to understand war from the perspective of a believer. Now, with that said, this is not all inclusive. This is not a dictatorial mindset that you should be in favor of a war, any war, or that you should be against a war, any war. But just to be able to, as you look at wars around the world and the potential for war, that you can at least understand it. Oh, hey, it's Brittany.
Hi, Brittany.
Brittany, welcome. This is, your request. We're talking about war. We're talking about war, not the Edwin Starr song, but talking about war as it was you that requested it, and just understanding that from the perspective of a believer. How do we understand it, right or wrong, those kinds of things, and hopefully just equip everyone that's watching to make an informed decision, an informed opinion on what is war, when is war right, when is war wrong. And certainly with everything going on in the Ukraine, maybe some people think, is it right for the U.S. to jump into this war? Now that's some of that, a lot of it heavily relies on a political decision, but there's also some implications for believers. So when you think of war, Aaron, in general, just we'll jump into the Bible in a minute, because there's lots of wars in the Bible. But when you think about war as it relates to the mindset and the belief system of a believer, what are some things that come to mind for you?
Well, wars have been fought over religion since literally time began.
Yeah.
So the Crusades, as an example, passing Holy Land back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
The colonization to a point.
Okay.
Not that it's a war, but that wars got fought as a result of.
Right. So you're saying wars that were fought as a result of colonization. So, for example, the westward expansion.
In America.
Yes.
Yep.
In America. Some wars were fought
against
yeah.
the Spanish-American War,
Mm-hmm.
or never that it wasn't that it was ever declared war against the Native Americans, but we constantly fought battles, or America constantly fought battles. There is, people have used that particular term for, for civil rights, for for a multitude of different things. One thing that I always thought was interesting is that here in America we talk about World War II.
Right.
And there's a lot about World War II, but we don't very often talk about World War I.
Okay.
Whereas when we were in Australia,
right,
it was about World War I,
Oh,
the
sure.
Great War.
Yes.
You know,
That's right.
and I just found that interesting that where our attention
Right.
gets placed. Sort of like the misconception that World War II was about the Holocaust. No, it happened to coincide,
Yeah.
but World War II was not fought because of the Holocaust.
Right.
Not that it was a side note by any means, but it was not the cause
Right.
or the catalyst, however you want to put it. That was not, that happened at the same time. It was going on, and we could do something about that too.
Right.
But that was not what was World War II.
Right.
And now we're talking about Ukraine, you know,
Yeah.
and the fact that a lot of, you know, for example, a lot of people believe that it's Putin trying to put the USSR back together.
Okay.
By reclaiming those countries that
Right.
used to be part of it.
Right.
And as I was looking up, you know, when you gave me the topic for this, and I was looking through some stuff, and there's a lot of topics about spiritual war
Yeah.
and when a war is just,
Yeah.
and it just there's a lot of different angles that, you know, that can make sense from that point of view.
Yeah.
You know, being a conscientious abstainer, you know, to fighting for what you think is just.
Yeah.
You know, all from not necessarily always religious, but even from a religious perspective, I can see being a conscientious objector. That's it.
Yes.
But I can also see fighting for the right.
Yeah.
You know, or fighting for your people, or fighting for your faith. You can see it from both ways.
Sure.
Being a display of your faith, of being a spiritual person.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And we dip our toes certainly into the Bible. We can see that, you know, in the Old Testament, there are times when even, you know, the Ark of God is carried into battle, and you know, if there was this this carte blanche prohibition against war, well, then we would have seen a lot more stories of people going into war, and they brought the ark into war, and then they fell dead, because we actually see stories of when people acted inappropriate. They touched the ark when they weren't supposed to. You know, when they were doing the
Across the river.
yeah, somebody touched the ark when they weren't supposed to, and they died, because you're not the guy that's supposed to touch the ark, even though they were, I think in at least one of the cases, they saw the ark
was starting to fall.
it was starting to fall, and they touched it and they died. So,
But the reason for that was the ground was made by God, and the ground is not unclean.
Right,
but
right.
human beings
That's right.
are
That's right.
sinful.
But my point to
Yeah.
that is, there's not this carte blanche
If
prohibition.
God was against a battle, a war, we certainly wouldn't be carrying the ark of his footstool into.
And then when the Israelites did, a lot more of them would have died, because it was
Well, there was
something that
one time that they took the ark, and they weren't supposed to, and they did.
Right.
They did all die. So yes, where you're not ordained,
Right.
prescribed to do it, then yes, there's absolutely. There's absolutely.
I see a couple of comments
Yep.
going on there.
War always feels primarily motivated by money. How
Yeah.
can someone start a war? How can someone starting a war live with their conscience? When you fight dirty, what is war really worth to initiate it anyway? The war in Ukraine is about land, that's it. I agree.
Yes. And
That's what it is. It's about land and power. And I would agree that money is, well, yeah, money, land, power, however you want to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to I think this one uses the word quarrel.
So here, well, while you're
Go
finding it, here's something that's interesting. The 6-Day War, also known as the Rosh Hashanah, the War of the New Year's War. The 6-Day, it was when Jordan and Syria and Saudi Arabia and all of these countries tried to come back and take Israel from the land from Israel. And Israel, drastically overwhelmed by forces, managed to take like 3 times their own landmass and hold it.
Right.
The only reason Syria and Jordan and all they got their land back is because Israel gave it back.
Yeah.
And then they went back to their border. But that shows you when God's on your side.
Right.
I don't care if your forces are overwhelming. You know,
That's right.
you know.
And we see a lot of that. You know, like you said, in recent recorded history,
Right.
as well as throughout the biblical history.
But Israel gave it back.
Right.
Right. They only wanted what that one little piece that they call home.
Right.
That's all they've. You know, I mean, there's actually more to it, but
Yeah.
that's what's fought over, and that is just those. But yet they won't even give the Middle Eastern countries still fight for that. You know.
Yes.
20 square miles.
Right.
I mean, for decades.
Yeah. That's good. Want to on this topic, this subtopic, I want you to turn to James chapter 4. We'll start with verse 1. And we'll just read a few of these verses. So he says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you?" I'll stop right there to say, you know, some people say, well, that's talking about individuals.
Right.
However, a society, a nation, is really
Right.
just the incorporation of people in the same word, corporeal, the embodiment, say that incorporation of people. So I would say that this applies to nations as well. So what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. And so as we look at the idea of whether it's Hitler's expansion all over Europe, or potentially the beginnings of Putin's expansion, perhaps into that Soviet sphere of influence. It was formerly the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but all those countries, even though the Soviet Union split up, that's still part of that Russian sphere of influence. And so it appears that Putin wants that. He wants that land and perhaps more beyond that. And so when we look at James, we can see that that's true. What is causing these wars?
You want what you.
That's right.
It's because I want.
That's
I
right.
desire. Yeah.
That's right. And so
it's not that Russia isn't big enough already.
Well, Russia's huge. I mean,
it is the biggest country
yes.
in the world.
Yes. It stretches from
The east to the west.
all the way to Japan. In fact, there's land that Russia is fighting over with Kuril Islands, that they're fighting over Japan, with Japan over, right? So Russia's huge, but they want more.
Well, Brittany was saying she doesn't understand why people stick around during the war, and I get non-combatants. I get that, but My fight would my disagreement with that would be if everybody just packs up and leaves,
Then you're yielding territory.
then you're yielding
Yeah.
too. And I understand and I agree that possessions aren't necessarily worth your life, but at the same time, there is a time and a point in time where you have to stand your ground, where you have to draw a line in the sand and say no more. I'm not going to do that. You're not taking this from us. You're not, and it's not about the land. I don't think in you know. I mean, frankly, these civilians are sticking around. They're staying behind to fight. You know, and plenty of them would typically be considered non-combatants, but they're sticking around to fight because it's their country and their land, and they don't want to give Putin.
Right.
They don't want to be ruled by Putin.
Right.
And frankly, they shouldn't have to be.
That's right.
They had their own country. They had their own politics, their own, you know, you know, he doesn't get to come in. But the women and children, there's plenty of people. If you're a non-combatant, there's no reason for you to stick around. You're just going to get in the way.
Yeah.
You really are. You're just going to be in the way, and you're going to end up being a casualty.
Right.
Or somebody's going to die trying to get you out. So
Right.
that I agree with.
So here's a piece on this, and you can, if you would, look in the. I'm looking at Romans 12 and 18. So I'd like to hear the different verbs on that, and this is to the point of, you know, why wouldn't they just leave? And that is a potential course that people just say, you know what, if he wants to land that bad, he can just have it. But here's what the NIV says. It says, starting at 17, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. And so, you know, when I look at the idea of, you know, the Ukrainians, they weren't doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
They were, you know, living as far as I know, what they would consider a peaceful life. They weren't trying to take from Russia. They weren't trying, and so it says right there, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And so there is, I'm not saying, not really to say some kind of legalistic out, but it's really a direction that we're not necessarily supposed to just say, you know what, go ahead and have the land. Now, I can live at peace with you, but when you start rolling tanks over the border, then I got to make a decision, right? Am I going to yield or am I going to push back? What is the...
Complete Jewish says, be sensitive, starting at 16, be sensitive to each other's needs.
Yeah.
Don't think yourselves better than others, but make humble people your friends. Don't be conceited.
Yeah.
Repay no one evil for evil, but try to do whatever everyone regards as good. If possible, and to the extent that it depends on you, live in peace with all people.
Yeah.
Never seek revenge, my friends. Instead, leave that to God's anger. For in the Tanakh it is written, Adonai says, vengeance is my responsibility, I will repay. And that comes from Proverbs 25.
Okay. And so, you know, would that be a legitimate way to look at it? Because you could very rightly so look at the other side of that and say, you know what? Okay, I'll walk away, and I'm going to leave it up to God to take back the land or to repay Russia. You could do that, and I think that's a legitimate course. Again, you know, my goal here is not to say you should be against all wars or you should be in favor of all wars. but only that you should be equipped to be able to look at it from the perspective of a believer and say, okay, this is my position on war, and I think it's absolutely right to, if you're going to be a Christian pacifist, that's okay. That's okay. But under, like you use the term apologetics, understand why.
Yeah.
Understand why.
So Brittany just posted, if a bad person broke into my house, my first thought would be to leave. I'll take my kids and leave, and they can have anything they want. Just don't touch my kids or my family.
Okay.
Nothing in my house is worth risking it. And you're to a point, you're right.
Yeah, that's
I don't know that I would necessarily leave, but I would be barricading myself
right.
in and yes, you're absolutely right. The TV is not worth,
That's right.
and you can have it.
Yeah.
But let me tell you what, you come in that room that I've barricaded myself in,
That's right.
and you're going to be on the other end of
Yeah.
a pistol. But that's because at that point, I've let you take everything in the house.
Right. Right.
But now you're coming after me and my family, and
Right.
that's not happening.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. But at the same time, this is my home.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I get to feel safe.
Right.
Where I should get to feel safe.
Yeah.
Just like going into the church
Yeah.
should be some place that you should feel safe. You shouldn't have to worry
Right.
about somebody coming to the church or the synagogue or the mosque or the temple or whatever,
Yeah.
the shrine, and shooting up or hurting people. There's just not a reason. That is one place. It's like going to a hospital. You shouldn't feel
Yeah.
threatened
That's right.
by violence going to a hospital.
Yeah, it's a place of refuge.
And sanctuary,
Should be.
yeah. And
They
when
call
you
it sanctuary.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you violate that, then
Yeah.
I think that's where it's almost indignance rises up. This is supposed to be a safe place. How dare you violate that? And that's where, but what we've seen a lot now, the school shootings, the church shootings, that's not about stuff.
Right.
That's about somebody coming to do people harm.
Yes. It's just about the violence.
It's about the violence.
Yeah.
And so in that one, not that you should, not that you should seek out violence, but at the same time, you or all of us, we're not here, we're not out hurting you. You should not have been here to do that.
Sure.
So,
And here's
my
what
opinion. That's fine.
And here's what I'll say to that, to both sides of that. I'll say you're both absolutely right.
Absolutely. I
You're
would say the
both
same thing.
absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Because as long as you can, with a clear conscience, and I would say with a biblical foundation, say, you know what, I did the right thing with
Right.
regard to either avoiding conflict or engaging in conflict.
Right. The idea of a just war.
That's right. And
Yes.
so what is the idea of a just war? There's three aspects to it.
Right.
It's just ad bellum. So why are you going into war? Is it a reasonable reason? Why are you engaging in conflict? Just in bellum, the conduct of the war itself
Right.
should be. So you shouldn't be like, you know what, we're gonna go through the Ukraine and we're gonna pillage and plunder and we're gonna blow up maternity hospitals and everything else. That is not being just in the conduct of war.
I think that goes along with do not repay evil for evil.
That's right.
So, when they do it, you don't respond to that with
Right.
that.
That's yes.
With
yes.
that same thing, and that then and people make that argument a lot about why America and some other people play by the rules and cops, not all of them,
That's
but
right.
I get it.
Yeah.
But police officers, America, even to the point of like in Star Trek, how Starfleet goes by certain rules. You know, even when the others don't.
Yeah.
That's because you holding up to certain standards.
Right.
Whether they be biblical or whatnot.
Whatever your moral grounding is.
Yeah,
right.
if you're holding to that, you know, not bombing hospitals and such, you know, only taking out military targets, you know, that kind of thing. Not bombing just to bomb either, because that's repaying evil for evil.
That's right. That's
so,
right. Yeah, you blew up our hospital, so we're going to blow up your hospitals and your daycare centers or whatever.
Well, even if you blew up our hospital, so we're going to take out your base. I mean, like the whole stinking base, not just your ability to make, you know, not just your ability to make war, but the whole thing. Right. So, you know, that's that standard.
Right.
You know, the standard, you know, of or I'm going to retreat until I have nothing more.
Right.
And then, but I think that's where Ukraine is in. They have not. I mean, there's still more Ukraine, but there's only so much that, you know, again, that can be given. And if we give up this, then we're going to be fighting even harder for that last little bit.
Right.
You know,
At some point, and you have no country.
Right.
Yeah. And then the third aspect of that is being just after the war. Right. Because in all wars, okay, it's going to be a win, lose, or draw. But assuming that there's a win on some side, if you impose unreasonable stipulations after the war, like nobody gets to eat and everybody is put into slavery to us because we won this war. That's not being just.
Well, even to the point, like I know we dropped the bomb, but I mean, America stayed and cleaned up and rebuilt Japan.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, so one could argue that, you know, whether or not the dropping of the bomb was being just in the conduct of war. You know, that's something that certainly can be debated.
But we stayed behind.
And so being just after the war, yes, I would say
Yeah, we absolutely stayed behind. Now, part of it was we left troops to, you know, monitor and whatnot, but at the same time, we also stayed and rebuilt. Sure. Invested money and, you know, all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's a yeah, you have to, as long as you live by the standards, you walk with the talk. Yeah,
and so I would say that the lesson from that that I would take away is, if you're going to be in a war, let it be a just war.
Please.
Let it be something that you can, okay, so liberation of an oppressed people. I'd say that's a reasonable, you know, and it's probably one of the restoring peace, right? If there was once a peace, and you have to go to war in order to return to a state of peace, then I would say that that's just. So, but at the same time, if you say, you know what, conscientious objector, it's fine. I think the Bible supports either perspective. The perspective that the Bible doesn't support is that is just that unfair, where you're repaying evil for evil, and those things. So is there a comment up there? Is that the same one? Okay.
She was just saying that if they made her choose, she'd defend her family, but after stuff, take it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Let me see. I wrote down. Let's see, a couple of questions here. I didn't get to write down all my questions, but I wrote. So, is war ever right? I think we kind of got to that. We did talk about war. We talked about some of the wars, just a little bit. Touched on that in the Old Testament. There was, being commanded by God to engage in war, and being supported by God in war, evidenced by the carrying of the Ark of the Covenant into battle, and actually being victorious in those cases. So I would say, to that question, war is sometimes right. But the other one, and I think this is this is an important one, also an important one. And that is the question of how should a believer conduct themselves in the midst of war? Not necessarily as a participant in war, because I think we discussed that being just if you are put in that position, but just being that sideline sort of citizen, where you say, okay, wow, there's a war happening, so what am I to do? How am I to govern myself? And my simple answer to that for me is, faithfully, right? You might say, oh, well, World War III is coming. There's nothing I could do about it. Oh, well, with me, I'm going to hide in the corner and not do anything. Well, there's still a lot of good that can be done, even if there is a war happening. There's still hungry kids around. There's still prayers that need to be prayed. There's still communities that need to be uplifted. There's still the potential for a next generation that needs leadership and guidance. And so I think all of those things kind of roll into the attitude that a believer should have, even during times of war, because I think, to me at least, doing less than that, and so this would apply to somebody that's whether they're a combatant or they're a conscientious objector. I think it's the same, and that is maintaining that faith in God and doing those good and right things, and not standing on the sidelines from all of society. So, what say you? Cool. Yeah, one of my favorite books. It's a long book. I gave it away. I need to buy another one. It's called Bonhoeffer. It's about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he was a preacher, but a preacher / activist during World War II. And if you ever saw the movie with Tom Cruise, the iPad Valkyrie, yeah, if you ever saw that movie, you'll hear about some of the work that Dietrich Bonhoeffer did, and so he was very vocal against the clergy that stood idly by and would not oppose what Hitler was doing. It sort of in the same way that Martin Luther King was fairly vocal against the clergy in America that did nothing during the civil rights movement. And so I would say that Dietrich Bonhoeffer kind of provides that model of, even though I'm clergy, even though I'm a non-combatant, by according to rules of law from time immemorial, although other countries, their chaplains carry guns. I don't know why the U.S. doesn't. But anyway, again, he was very vocal, and he was actually active to the point that he was helping folks to escape, that he was even part of he helped somewhat with the assassination plot against Hitler. Yeah.
I mean, there were nuns that wrote, and clergy that did write letters to the Pope and such. And there are still pilgrimages of nuns and such that go to Auschwitz, Birkenau, to in memory of those sisters and clergy that objected, and because they objected, they ended up
Yeah.
dying in Auschwitz. So, there were plenty who did.
Right. Right.
But yes, there were plenty who didn't.
Yeah.
And that was part of when he became Benedict, Pope Benedict.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the arguments against Benedict becoming Pope, was as a youth, he was part of the Hitler Youth.
Right.
But whether or not he actually believed the rhetoric or not,
Right.
it would. I can't speak to that because I don't know and I haven't seen and I wasn't there.
Right.
Is it a good thought to say, hey, do we want this guy to be in charge? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
but he became Pope.
Yeah.
And if God didn't want that to happen, he would not have let him become Pope.
That's true.
He didn't stay Pope for very long.
He was a transitional Pope.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, he did what he was supposed to do, and that's why he stepped out. But, I'm not there to, again, I can't judge because I wasn't there and I don't know. And I can see what evidence we can find, but even then, just because you're a member of a group,
Right.
when you were,
Right.
a preteen does not make you.
Right. Yeah.
Just like I've had that discussion with several people also, in that that not all German soldiers were Nazis.
Right.
Those were two different things.
Yeah.
Brittany sent, I wonder what this war is going to resolve into. Is something going to happen to Putin? I don't want anything to happen to Zelensky. I was watching some news earlier, and Estonia has called for a no-fly zone,
Mm-hmm.
and they're NATO.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things that, you know what, if Europe actually all stood up and said no together, and everybody sent somebody, some troops to the line, I think Putin would get the idea. It's sort of like when the one kid stands up to the bully, and then a whole bunch of others, stand up behind him and say no more too.
Right.
The bully finally backs down. This is what's going to have to happen if we want to stop this before it gets too much further. And it has to be Europe because they're on the front line. It can't be us leading the charge. It's not our. We're not. We're involved, but we're not directly involved. They are going to have to. You can't always be the big brother that comes in and saves the little kid from the bully. That's only going to stop it so long. Europe's got to step in and say no.
Yeah.
I think it would be a big thumb in his, up his nose if they admitted Ukraine to NATO just to spite him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. I don't know what'll happen to Putin because
Putin's not going anywhere.
In 1944, 1943, nobody knew what was going to happen to Hitler.
Yeah.
You could draw parallels to it, and you could say, "Oh, here's what I think should happen," but the reality is we don't know.
No.
We don't know. I don't know. Is Putin the Antichrist? I don't know. Whatever.
I'm going to say no to that one too.
Is he an Antichrist?
Is he not a good guy? Yeah.
Yeah, probably not.
He's not the
He's like a
Antichrist.
judo black belt or something.
Great.
Yeah.
Well done for him.
Yeah, good job. So I would say that if I get anything from this study is just the idea that, don't be, and it doesn't exactly apply in this case, but it does a little bit. When you look at Luke 21, and Luke 21 and 9, and you could read through all of that. And I think it does provide a, because this is people talking about, oh, when are the end days coming? That's what this is about. But I think the sentiment still applies. When you start at 7, teacher, they asked, when will all these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place? He replied, watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name and claiming, I am he, the time is near, do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away. Then he said to them, nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, pestilence in various places, fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison. You'll be brought before kings and governors. And so that piece, it kind of gets into, your personal, that personal sense of persecution. But that verse 9, it really kind of sticks with me. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. Do not be frightened. Just remain faithful. Understand, okay, so where do these, from a spiritual perspective, where are these wars coming from? We saw that in James, right? It's greed. You don't have, but you want. That's where the wars come from. Is there a spiritual component to it? I think so, and I think that spiritual component is probably drawn from the absence of true belief, because if there was a true belief in God and the idea that we should try to live at peace with everyone, then you wouldn't have this.
The CJB says don't panic.
Don't panic.
And when you hear wars and revolutions, don't panic.
Yeah. So there's
people will fight each other and nations will fight each other.
Yeah.
So, but I like that. Don't panic.
Yeah, don't panic. That's good. That's good. Yeah. I see a comment on the.
Oh, her signal is coming in and out.
Oh, okay.
It's all good.
Yeah. So that's my encouragement to you. Just you ask the question, what do we think about wars? Again, I think every believer is entitled to their own opinion about war. Should I be a pacifist or a conscious objector? Should I be a combatant? I go back to the idea of know why. Know why you would be either one of those. Be able to provide a defense when somebody says, "Well, hey, why are you a conscious objector?" Okay, well, here's why. I look at Romans 12 and 17. In as much as possible, live at peace with all men. That's why I'm a conscientious objector. Okay, cool.
45 minutes, by the way.
Oh, we're at 45 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna start wrapping up. But and if you're the person that says, yeah, I'm gonna pick up a sword and go to war. Okay, well, understand why, and you could in fact use the exact same verse and say, well, it was no longer possible for me to do that, and so I couldn't live at peace. And oh, by the way, I believe this is a just war. I have every intent in my heart of being just in, conducting myself justly in warfare, and then afterwards I'm going to be just as well. So to me, the prayer The prayer, one of the prayers should be that if the U.S. ends up getting in this war, that it is for the right reasons, that it would be a just entry into the war, a just conduct of the war, and and being just and fair after the war. Closing thoughts. All right.
Okay.
Cool. Well, that's war. That's war. At least that from a Christian perspective, from a perspective of a believer. So, if you got any questions on it, post them. We'll answer them, and we will be back next week. Next week we'll be back. By the way, we had a good time in Virginia. So if you're in the Virginia area, come mid-July into July. Look us up. It'd be great to break bread with you in person. So cool. All right. Y'all have a good night. I think we are gonna go have dinner. All right. I'm supposed to press the button now.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna press the button now.